The auction is set. These 2 coins for the woman. Any takers?
I'll take them!
Give her to me!
Please, no! No, I beg you!
The relentless frontier sun beat down on the squalid auction yard, where Cain Maddox had only intended to buy a used plow and some salt pork for his struggling ranch. He was a man carved from decades of solitude, his heart a locked box buried beneath the grief of losing his young wife and infant son to scarlet fever 7 hard, lonely years ago. The auctioneer, a sweating vulture in a stained vest, dragged a wisp of a girl onto the block and barked that she was a mute, half-breed brat seized from a burned-out homestead with no papers, no voice, and no value. The crowd jeered and called her damaged, a useless mouth that couldn't even scream. And the bidding started at a single pitiful dollar, as if she were a lame horse bound for the rendering yard. Cain's eyes locked onto hers across the sea of dusty hats, and what he saw in those dark, haunted depths was not emptiness, but a terrified soul trapped behind a wall of unspeakable trauma and grief. Without conscious thought, his calloused hand shot up, and he barked out a bid of $3, which silenced the crowd and sent the auctioneer's gavel crashing down with finality. The girl did not smile, did not nod, did not make a single sound. She simply stared at him with those fathomless eyes as he led her away from the stench and the cruelty of the town square. He lifted her gently onto his old wagon, and she curled into a ball on the wooden seat like a wounded fawn, her thin arms wrapped tightly around her own trembling, narrow shoulders. The ride to his remote ranch was long and silent, the only sounds being the creak of the wheels and the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk circling the endless golden prairie sky. Cain named her gently, telling her he would call her Hope because every man needed some, and she did not respond, but her fingers twitched slightly against the fabric of her tattered sleeve. He gave her the small bedroom that had once belonged to his son, the room he had kept locked and untouched for 7 years because the pain of opening the door had been simply too unbearable. Inside, he placed a new wool blanket and a basin of fresh water, then retreated to the porch where he sat in his old rocking chair and wondered what in blazes he had just done by bringing her here. For the first 3 weeks, Hope did not speak a single word or make any sound beyond the soft padding of her bare feet on the wooden floor as she began to tentatively explore the cabin. She would sit on the porch and watch him mend fences, her dark eyes following his every movement, and he would tip his hat to her and speak in low, gentle tones about nothing in particular. Cain never pressured her, never demanded she earn her keep, and never once raised his voice, because he understood in his marrow that some wounds are so deep they require oceans of silence and patience to even begin healing. One morning, he awoke to find the kitchen swept clean and a pot of weak but hot coffee waiting on the stove. And he knew Hope had begun her slow, silent journey toward trusting the simple safety of his home. He found a slate board and chalk at the trading post, and he placed it on her bed without a word. And the next day, she had drawn a crude but recognizable picture of the old barn cat, Whiskers. Through the long golden autumn, they developed a silent language of nods, gestures, and shared glances. And Cain found the crushing weight of his own loneliness beginning to lift like morning fog over the creek. He would tell her stories about his late wife, about how she used to sing Irish lullabies, and Hope would listen with such intensity that he felt truly heard for the first time in 7 aching years. One afternoon, Hope walked out to the corral and stood perfectly still until the wildest mustang on the ranch, a black Mari named Tempest, walked over and rested her head on the girl's thin shoulder. Cain watched from the barn, his breath caught in his throat, and he realized Hope possessed the same mysterious, gentle magic with animals that she seemed to carry within her own silent soul. Winter descended with a vengeance, and a brutal blizzard trapped them inside for 5 days, during which Hope began to hum a soft, wordless melody that was the first vocal sound she had ever produced in his presence. Cain wept silently into his scarf when he heard it, not from sadness, but from a profound, overwhelming gratitude that the wall around her soul was finally mercifully beginning to show cracks. A neighboring cattle baron named Randall Cross began to covet Kane's land, which sat on a valuable water source, and he started sending armed men to cut fences and poison the watering holes. One frigid evening, Randall and 4 hired thugs rode onto the property with rifles and torches, demanding that Kane sign over his deed or watch his barn and cabin burn to smoking, bitter ash. Kane stepped onto the porch with his old Henry rifle and told them he would die before he surrendered the only home that had ever given him a reason to keep drawing breath each dawn. A shot rang out, and Kane crumpled to the frozen ground with blood spreading across his shoulder. And Randall laughed, saying the lonely rancher had finally run out of time and pathetic luck. Hope burst through the cabin door, her eyes wild and her thin body shaking, and she threw herself over Kane's bleeding form, as if to shield him from the muzzles of those cruel, gloating men. Randall sneered and asked her if she was going to scream for help, mocking her by saying that a mute, broken-nothing girl couldn't save anyone from the inevitable. Hope rose to her full, trembling height, opened her mouth, and the sound that erupted from her throat was not a whimper, but a scream that split the frozen night air like a lightning bolt from a vengeful heaven. She screamed Kane's name with a force so raw, so primal, so searing with desperate, ferocious love that every horse in the barn began to rear and kick and shriek in unison with her. The Black Mar Tempest exploded from the corral, charged Randall Cross, and sent him flying into a snowdrift while his hired thugs scattered in the face of the girl's shattering, unearthly voice. Hope collapsed beside Kane, cradling his head in her lap, and she whispered his name over and over and over as if the floodgates of 7 silent years had finally, gloriously burst wide open. Kane, bleeding but conscious, lifted his good hand to her tear-streaked cheek and told her that her first word was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard in his entire sorrow-scarred life. The nearest doctor saved Kane's arm, and the sheriff arrested Randall Cross for attempted murder. But the real miracle had already happened on that blood-stained patch of frozen, trampled grass. In the weeks that followed, Hope began to speak in halting, fragile sentences, her voice like a rusty bell learning to ring again after being buried in decades of suffocating, silent terror and isolation. She told Kane that she had witnessed her entire family massacred by raiders when she was 8 years old, and the shock had stolen her voice and locked it away in a prison of absolute, unending grief. Kane held her hands and told her that his own silence had been different, but just as deep. That he had been dying of loneliness in that cabin long before she arrived with her slate and her quiet, healing grace. She laughed for the first time when Whiskers the cat chased a mouse across the kitchen and tumbled headfirst into a flour sack, emerging white and indignant, and the sound was like silver bells in a sunlit meadow. Kane taught her to write her name, her real name, which was Lila, and she practiced it on her slate until the letters were elegant and proud, a declaration of her reclaimed and blossoming identity. When spring painted the valley in wildflowers, Kane knelt in that very patch of grass where she had screamed his name, and he asked Lila to be his wife, not out of obligation but out of deep, abiding, joyful love. She said yes in a voice that was still soft but now steady and true, and she added that she had loved him since the moment he bid $3 and looked at her like she was a human being and not damaged livestock. They were married under the cottonwood tree by the creek, and the Black Mare Tempest stood as their witness, her head bowed as if offering her own silent, majestic blessing to the sacred union. Their first child, a daughter they named Grace, was born the following spring, and Lila sang Irish lullabies over her cradle, the same songs Kane had described during those long, quiet evenings of their tentative courtship. Kane would often watch his wife and daughter from the porch, his heart so full it ached, and he marveled that $3 and a moment of compassion had purchased a lifetime of immeasurable, radiant treasure. The ranch flourished, and they built a schoolhouse on the property, where Lila taught children that silence did not mean stupidity and that every soul had a voice, worth waiting patiently and lovingly to hear. Randall Cross died in prison, a forgotten footnote to a story that was never about villains, but always about two broken, lonely people who became each other's rescue and redemption and joy. Years later, when travelers asked about the beautiful woman with the gentle, musical voice who ran the ranch alongside her devoted husband, the locals would say she was once called damaged and mute and worthless. Then they would smile and add that she spoke her husband's name first, and that single word had rebuilt an entire world from the ashes of silence and sorrow and transformed a lonely rancher into the richest man in the territory. Their love story became a legend whispered around campfires, proof that the most powerful voices often belong to those who were told they had none, and that $3 can indeed buy a priceless forever. The slate board still hangs above the mantel in the old cabin, a sacred relic that reminds all who see it that patience is the language of the deepest, most transformative, and most enduring love. I hope this tale of silence shattered by love has moved something deep within your spirit, and if it has, please honor that feeling by sharing this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Your subscription to Stories Hub Official is the foundation that allows us to bring these forgotten frontier voices to life. And we would be deeply grateful to have you in our family of dreamers and romantics. Please leave a comment and tell me the exact moment you wept or smiled or cheered, because your words create a community of connection that stretches across time and space like a warm, unbreakable thread. Hit that like button if you believe that no soul is too damaged, too silent, or too lost to be loved. And let's spread that message of hope to every corner of this vast and longing world. From our humble storytelling hearth to your screen, we send our heartfelt thanks. And we eagerly await the chance to welcome you back for another powerful, unforgettable Western romance very soon.